They laughed when he walked in, wearing a battered leather jacket and a gray scarf a German shepherd glued to his side. To the doctors, Jack Miller was just another quiet night worker, too old, too rough, and definitely out of place. They never asked why his hands never hesitated around blood. They never asked why his dog never left his heel. Then a military helicopter landed on the hospital roof. A SEAL commander was bleeding out. And when the monitors started screaming, the man they mocked stepped forward and everything changed. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Winter pressed down hard on St. Anthony Memorial Hospital in northern Montana, the cold turning breath into fog and silence, into something sharp and watchful. At 5:42 a.m., a battered blue pickup truck rolled into the ice-glazed parking lot. The driver's door opened slowly, as if the man stepping out felt every degree of the cold in his bones. Jack Miller, 45 years old, stood upright for a moment before moving, letting the ache in his joints settle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a lean frame, hardened by years of physical strain rather than comfort. His face was angular, weathered, marked by faint scars that suggested injuries not earned in any ordinary life. A short, neatly trimmed beard framed a jaw that rarely softened, and his eyes, steel gray, alert, held the quiet vigilance of a man who never truly relaxed. Jack wore the same clothes every shift, a dark brown leather jacket thick and worn smooth at the elbows, a red and navy flannel shirt beneath it, faded jeans scuffed pale at the knees, heavy leather boots built for cold ground, and a gray wool scarf wrapped once around his neck. The outfit wasn't a style choice. It was armor. When Jack opened the passenger door, a German shepherd stepped out with controlled precision. The dog Max was nearly 8 years old, large and powerfully built, with a black and tan coat, dulled slightly by age but still immaculate. His ears stood tall, his amber eyes sharp and intelligent, scanning the surroundings before his paws even touched the ground. Max moved close to Jack's leg, matching his pace without command. He wasn't a pet that wandered. He was a presence that guarded. Inside the hospital, Jack signed in without ceremony. Night shift support staff rarely earned more than a nod. His job description was simple: transport patients, sanitize rooms, haul medical waste, clean what others preferred not to see. The jobs that carried no prestige, no gratitude, and no forgiveness for mistakes. Jack did them quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. The nurses noticed him anyway. Some called him the old guard. Others joked under their breath about the janitor with a police dog. They assumed he was unemployed before this assumed he had nowhere else to go. Jack never corrected them. Silence was easier than explaining a past that never fit into polite conversation. Max stayed by his side, unless ordered to wait. Hospital policy technically forbade animals beyond service dogs, but enforcement depended on who complained loudest. That person was usually Dr. Ethan Brooks. Brooks was the hospital's lead trauma surgeon, early 40s, sharp-featured, clean-cut, with perfectly styled dark hair and a confidence polished by years of praise. He walked fast, spoke faster, and carried himself like a man accustomed to obedience. To Brooks, order mattered. Control mattered. And Jack Miller, with his silence, his dog, and his refusal to explain himself, was disorder. "I don't want that animal near Trauma Bay," Brooks snapped once, adjusting his pristine white coat. "This isn't a kennel." Jack had nodded, said nothing, and waited until Brooks was gone before continuing his work. Max, sensing the tension, remained still, muscles coiled but restrained. Jack didn't hate Brooks. Hate required energy. What Jack felt instead was distance, the same distance he had learned to maintain years ago when caring too much had consequences. As the morning wore on, snow thickened against the windows. Jack pushed an empty gurney down a corridor, the wheels humming softly against polished floor. Max padded beside him, nails clicking in rhythm. Jack's mind drifted as it often did in moments of repetition. He thought about how hospitals sounded like field stations if you listened closely enough. The beeping monitors, the rushed voices, the underlying sense that something could go wrong at any second. That was when the overhead speakers crackled. 3 sharp tones cut through the air, louder than any routine announcement. Jack stopped moving. Max froze instantly, ears snapping upright. Code Black. Military high-value patient incoming. ETA 3 minutes. The words echoed down the hallway. Conversations died mid-sentence. Staff straightened, adrenaline spiking. Jack's chest tightened not with fear but recognition. His jaw clenched. A distant thunder rolled overhead. Not thunder rotors. The sound deepened, heavy and rhythmic, vibrating through the walls and into Jack's boots. Max let out a low, controlled growl, not aggressive but alert. Jack whispered, barely audible. "That's not medevac." He had heard that sound before, felt it in his ribs in places no map recorded. Nurses rushed past. Dr. Brooks barked orders, his voice carrying urgency, sharpened by importance. Jack remained where he was, hand gripping the gurney, rail eyes fixed on the corridor leading to the emergency entrance. The doors burst open moments later. Paramedics rushed in, wheeling a stretcher soaked in blood. The patient was male, mid-40s, muscular even beneath torn tactical clothing, his chest rising shallowly beneath tubes and wires. His face was pale, jaw clenched even in unconsciousness, as if resisting surrender. A patch on the ruined fabric marked him unmistakably military. Jack saw the blood first. Bright arterial. Too much of it. Max's growl deepened, reverberating in his chest. Staff shouted vitals. Dr. Brooks moved forward, commanding, confident, already claiming the moment. Jack took one step closer. No one noticed him. No one noticed the way his eyes tracked the bleeding with practiced speed, or how his breathing slowed instead of quickening. This was the chaos he understood. The heart monitor screamed suddenly, a long, piercing tone that silenced the room. Jack's muscles tensed. Max's teeth bared just slightly. And without realizing he was doing it, Jack stepped forward again, crossing a line no one had given him permission to cross, just as the sound of the monitor stretched into something final. Snow lashed against the windows of St. Anthony Memorial Hospital as dawn crept closer, the storm outside mirroring the violence unfolding inside Trauma Bay 1. The man on the gurney was identified quickly. Commander Ryan Cole, mid-40s, United States Navy SEAL commander level. A body built like reinforced steel, even while broken. His dark hair was matted with sweat and blood. His jaw clenched despite the sedation, as if his body refused to fully surrender. Multiple gunshot wounds riddled his torso, some cauterized in the field, others still bleeding freely. The smell of iron filled the room. Dr. Ethan Brooks took command instantly. He moved with practiced authority, barking orders in a clipped, confident tone, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed unease. Brooks was handsome in a polished way, tall and athletic, his surgical cap hiding carefully styled hair, his hand steady, but his mind racing. He thrived on control, and this case threatened to take it from him. BP is dropping called Nurse Allison Reed, a slim woman in her early 30s with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her voice strained but professional. 60 over 40 and falling. Get fluids wide open. Prep for thoracotomy. Brooks snapped. We're losing him. Blood continued to spill, darkening the sheets, soaking through compression pads faster than they could be replaced. The monitors shrieked in protest. Brooks focused on the chest wounds, his attention locked where training told him to look, but something wasn't adding up. Along the wall, half-shadowed and unnoticed, Jack Miller stood with his hands buried deep in the pockets of his brown leather jacket. His posture was still, but inside him, something ancient had stirred. His breathing slowed, his vision narrowed. He wasn't seeing chaos. He was seeing patterns. Years ago, in places with no walls and no second chances, this same silence before death had preceded the same mistake. At Jack's feet, Max sat with perfect discipline, his broad chest rising evenly, his amber eyes fixed on the table. His ears twitched at every spike of sound. This was not fear. This was readiness. Jack's gaze dropped, tracing the line of blood not pooling where it should. The chest was bad, yes, but the volume didn't match. His eyes flicked lower to the groin, the thigh, the subtle swelling beneath tactical fabric. His jaw tightened. Femoral Jack said aloud, his voice low but clear. "You've got a femoral bleed." Dr. Brooks didn't even turn. "I didn't ask," he snapped. "Security, get him out of here." Jack took a step forward. His pulse hammered now, not from panic, but from the certainty that came when seconds mattered. "You're missing it," he said louder. "He's bleeding out below." "Enough," Brooks barked, finally spinning. His eyes landed on Jack with open contempt. "You're not staff. You're a janitor with a dog. Get out." Two orderlies moved toward Jack, hesitant but obedient. Jack felt the old anger rise, sharp and dangerous, but he swallowed it. He had promised himself he wouldn't do this again, that he wouldn't step into someone else's war. The monitor screamed suddenly, a long, unbroken tone slicing through the room. Max exploded into sound. The German Shepherd lunged forward one step and barked deep, commanding a sound that cut through panic like a blade. It wasn't wild. It was a warning. For a split second, everyone froze. That second was enough. Jack moved. He shrugged off the hands reaching for him and crossed the space to the table in 3 long strides. He didn't shout. He didn't explain. His mind was already 3 steps ahead. He yanked aside torn fabric near the commander's upper thigh and plunged his gloved hand into the wound without hesitation. Blood surged, hot and violent, coating his arm to the elbow. Gasps filled the room. Jack drove his fist deeper, angling pressure against bone, finding the artery by feel alone. He grimaced as pain flared up his own arm, old injuries protesting, but his grip tightened instead. "Stop compressions," Jack growled, his voice no longer quiet, no longer civilian. It carried weight. "You're pumping him empty." The arterial spray slowed, then slowed again. The monitor beeped once. Then again. "BP's coming up," Allison whispered, eyes wide. "He's stabilizing." Dr. Brooks stared stunned, his mouth slightly open. For the first time since medical school, he had no words. The man he'd dismissed had just reached into death and dragged someone back. Jack didn't look at him. "Clamp," he ordered. "Now." Brooks fumbled for the instrument, his hands suddenly clumsy, and placed it into Jack's blood-slicked grip. With practiced precision that belied his shaking hand, Jack guided the clamp blindly, found the torn vessel, and secured it. Only then did he slowly withdraw his arm. Silence crushed the room. Jack stepped back, breathing hard, his face pale beneath the beard blood dripping from his sleeve to the floor. Max was at his side instantly, body angled protectively, eyes scanning. "That bleed would have killed him," Jack said quietly. "You can finish the rest now." For a moment, no one moved. Then reality slammed back in. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Brooks roared, fury flooding in to cover humiliation. "Get him out! He assaulted staff, contaminated the field." Security rushed in. Jack didn't resist as hands grabbed his arms. He met Brooks's eyes once, just once. There was no triumph there, only exhaustion. As he was dragged toward the door, Jack caught a glimpse of the monitor again. The line was steady. Commander Ryan Cole was alive. That would have to be enough. The doors slammed shut behind him, sealing the room and the truth inside. Jack was shoved into the hallway, blood on his jacket. Max pressed close, growling softly at anyone who came too near. Inside Trauma Bay 1. Dr. Ethan Brooks straightened his coat, already reshaping the story in his mind. Outside, Jack Miller leaned against the cold wall, heart still racing, knowing with absolute certainty that saving a life had just cost him everything. Night settled heavily over St. Anthony Memorial Hospital, the storm easing into a bitter, watchful cold that pressed against the glass like an unseen audience. Jack Miller stood in the administrative corridor, blood dried dark along the sleeve of his brown leather jacket. The adrenaline had drained from his body, leaving behind a familiar ache in his shoulders and spine, the kind that reminded him of years he preferred not to count. Max sat at his heel, calm and unmoving amber eyes, tracking every passerby with quiet suspicion. Jack rested one hand lightly against the dog's neck, grounding himself in the steady warmth there. They didn't keep him waiting long. Dr. Ethan Brooks strode down the hall with purpose, flanked by Margaret Klein, the hospital's night administrator. Klein was a woman in her late 50s with iron-gray hair cut into a severe bob, sharp glasses perched permanently on her nose, and a posture that radiated authority shaped by budgets rather than blood. She barely glanced at Jack before speaking. "Jack Miller," she said crisply, "you are not licensed medical staff. You entered a sterile trauma environment, assaulted personnel, and endangered a critical patient." Jack listened without interrupting. His face remained still, his gray eyes unreadable beneath the hospital lights. He had been yelled at by better men in worse places. Words no longer cut the way they once did. Brooks folded his arms, his voice smooth, now rehearsed. "I had the situation under control. His interference compromised the procedure. We were lucky." Jack almost laughed at that, but the sound never came. He looked past Brooks toward the double doors that led back to Trauma Bay 1. Somewhere beyond them, Commander Ryan Cole was breathing. That was enough. "You're terminated effective immediately," Klein continued, sliding a clipboard forward. "Security will escort you off the premises." Jack nodded once, understood. No argument, no explanation. No mention of the artery he'd clamped blind or the life he'd anchored with his bare hand. Those things belonged to another version of him, one he had tried to bury. He turned and walked away. Max rose instantly and followed, matching his stride, head-level, tail low. Staff watched them pass with a mix of relief and unease, as if something dangerous had just been escorted out. Outside, the cold hit hard. Jack didn't slow as he crossed the parking lot, each step carrying him further from a place that had never wanted him anyway. Inside the ICU, Commander Ryan Cole drifted toward consciousness. The pain came first, sharp and insistent, followed by the sound of machines. He opened his eyes to sterile, white and soft, beeping his body heavy and restrained by tubes. He tested his fingers, then his breath. A nurse noticed and leaned in. "Commander Cole, you're safe. You're at St. Anthony Memorial." Cole frowned. He didn't remember the hospital. He remembered gunfire, heat, the smell of dust and blood, and something else. Something firm. A grip like iron. A voice that hadn't panicked. "Who stopped the bleeding?" he rasped. The nurse hesitated. Dr. Brooks led the procedure. Cole closed his eyes. The answer didn't sit right. He remembered pain, yes, but also control. He remembered a pressure that hurt like hell, but felt final, decisive. And he remembered a shape at the edge of his vision. Broad shoulders, a low voice, a dog, a presence that guarded even as death circled. That wasn't him, Cole murmured. When his team arrived hours later, the room shifted. Lieutenant Mark Hayes, Cole's second-in-command, stood rigid at the foot of the bed. Hayes was younger, early 30s, lean and sharp-faced with close-cropped hair and eyes that missed nothing. Beside him was Chief Petty Officer Dan Wolfe Carter, thick-necked, scarred with a permanent scowl softened only by loyalty. Cole spoke slowly, choosing each word. "Find the man who put his hand inside me and kept me alive." Hayes didn't question it. He nodded once and turned away. Security footage didn't lie. They watched the grainy video from Trauma Bay 1 in silence. They saw Brooks shouting. They saw chaos. And then they saw Jack Miller move. No hesitation, no fear, just action. They watched him clamp the artery and stabilize the commander while everyone else froze. Hayes paused the frame on Jack's face. "Zoom in." Carter's jaw tightened. "That's not a janitor." Records came next. What little the hospital had on Jack Miller was thin. Too thin. Hayes made a call to an old contact, a man who owed him favors, and didn't ask questions. Within minutes, another file surfaced, sealed and buried. Jack Miller, former senior combat medic, attached to special operations units under non-disclosure. Discharged quietly after sustained injuries. Record classified. Then there was Max. Footage showed the German Shepherd moving with discipline, responding to Jack's body language rather than commands. Carter exhaled sharply. That dog's K9 trained, combat trained, the pieces locked together with an ugly click. While the truth surfaced inside secure rooms, another presence stirred beyond hospital walls. A black SUV idled down the street, headlights off, engine low. Inside, two men watched the hospital through binoculars. They were clean-cut, unremarkable, dressed like contractors. Their eyes were cold. "Target survived," one said into a burner phone. A pause. Then, "Proceed." Back in the parking lot, Jack reached his truck. He opened the door and leaned inside, resting his forehead briefly against the cold metal frame. Max nudged his hand, gently sensing the shift. Jack straightened, letting the night air burn his lungs. He had saved a life, lost a job, exposed a past. And somewhere deep inside, the instinct he had tried to silence stirred again, whispering that this wasn't over. Snow thickened into a blinding curtain as night swallowed St. Anthony Memorial Hospital, the wind howling hard enough to rattle the glass and erase the world beyond the walls. The first shot shattered the illusion of safety. It echoed down the main corridor like a thunderclap, followed by screaming, then another shot, closer this time. Emergency lights flickered, then died completely, plunging the hospital into darkness before the backup generators coughed to life, bathing everything in a dim red glow. Smoke rolled through the air, acrid and choking. In the ICU, Commander Ryan Cole felt the change before anyone spoke. His instincts, dulled by painkillers and injury, flared violently awake. He pushed himself upright with a grimace, ignoring the protests of his body. He had survived enough ambushes to recognize one. "They're here," he muttered. Down in the parking lot, Jack Miller was just pulling onto the road when his radio crackled violently to life. The voice on the other end was strained. Urgent, Lieutenant Mark Hayes. "Jack, we've got armed intruders inside the hospital. Professional. This isn't random." Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't ask how Hayes had reached him, or why. He swung the truck around without hesitation. "I'm coming back," Jack said. Inside the hospital, chaos spread with terrifying speed. Armed men in dark tactical gear moved methodically through the lower floors, their faces obscured by masks, weapons suppressed but deadly. They were calm, efficient, communicating in short, coded phrases. This was not panic. This was a hunt. Patients screamed as gurneys were overturned, nurses scattered. Margaret Klein, the administrator, huddled behind a desk, pale and shaking, clutching a phone that no longer had signal. Dr. Ethan Brooks froze near the nurse's station, his confidence evaporating as reality stripped him bare. This wasn't a surgical complication. This was something he had never trained for. Jack entered through a side door moments later, the cold still clinging to his jacket. Max was already moving, body-low muscles, coiled eyes burning with purpose. The German Shepherd didn't wait for commands. He recognized the shift instantly. The world had changed, and he had a role to play. Jack grabbed a fallen security guard's radio. "Hayes, where are you? Third floor stairwell." Hayes replied, gunfire crackling behind him. "We're pinned." Jack closed his eyes for half a second, centering himself. The fear was there, buried deep, but so was something else: clarity. He moved with quiet authority, stepping into the hallway and raising his voice. "Everyone who can walk, follow me," Jack ordered. "Patients first. Staff second. Move now." People hesitated, then they obeyed. Something in Jack's tone cut through the panic. He used overturned gurneys as moving barricades, pushing them ahead as shields. IV poles became obstacles. Crash carts became cover. He directed survivors into interior corridors away from windows and entrances, just as he had done years ago in villages with no names. Max sprinted ahead, stopping at intersections, growling low whenever danger approached. When one masked intruder rounded a corner too fast, Max launched, slamming into the man's legs with crushing force, teeth locking onto fabric and flesh. The man screamed and went down. Max released instantly and repositioned, never lingering, never reckless. Jack reached the third-floor stairwell just as Hayes and Chief Petty Officer Dan Wolf Carter ran dry on ammo. Hayes was bleeding from a graze across his forehead, his sharp eyes still focused. Carter looked feral, shoulders hunched, ready to fight bare-handed if needed. Jack slid a gurney sideways, blocking the corridor. "Fall back," he ordered. "Now." They didn't argue. Floor by floor, they pushed back. Not by force alone, but by control. Jack used fire extinguishers to blind intruders with white chemical clouds. Oxygen tanks rolled and detonated into walls to scatter formations. Surgical lights shattered to plunge attackers into disorientation. It wasn't pretty. It was effective. By the time they reached the top stairwell, only one path remained: the roof. Wind slammed into them as Jack kicked open the heavy steel door. Snow whipped sideways, visibility reduced to yards. The rooftop helipad loomed ahead, slick with ice and chaos. A black helicopter hovered above rotors, screaming its floodlights, cutting through the storm. Armed men fast-roped down boots, slamming into concrete. Cole emerged behind them, supported by Hayes, his face drawn, but eyes burning. "That's their extraction," Cole said. "If they leave, they'll come back." Jack scanned the scene, calculating angles, distances, risks. He looked down at Max, who stood rigid, snow collecting on his back, eyes locked on the enemy. "This ends here," Jack said. The gunfight exploded across the rooftop. Snow kicked up in violent bursts as rounds struck concrete. Jack dragged a wounded nurse behind an HVAC unit, using the massive metal structure as cover. Max darted between shadows, disrupting advances, forcing attackers to split their attention. One of the intruders charged. Jack met him head-on, swinging a metal trauma tray with bone-jarring force, then driving a knee into the man's chest. They went down hard. Jack rose, breathing heavily, hands, shaking not from fear, but from the weight of everything he had tried to leave behind. The helicopter wobbled as its pilot struggled against the wind. Jack's eyes flicked to a loose oxygen cylinder near the helipad edge. A plan formed, reckless and necessary. He shoved the tank forward, shouting, "Cover your ears." Gunfire sparked. Jack fired once, striking the valve. The tank rocketed forward, spinning wildly, slamming into the helicopter's tail assembly with a metallic scream. The rotor shattered. The aircraft lurched sideways, losing stability, then crashed onto the pad in a storm of sparks and snow. Silence followed, broken only by the wind. The remaining attackers fled into the darkness. Jack stood still, chest-heaving snow melting into blood on his jacket. Max returned to his side, pressing close, steady, and alive. Below them, sirens wailed as law enforcement finally arrived, their lights painting the snow in red and blue. Jack looked at the hospital beneath his boots, smoke curling from shattered windows. He had never wanted this fight, but it had found him anyway. Morning came slowly to Montana, pale light spreading across the snow like a cautious truce after a long night of violence. St. Anthony Memorial Hospital looked smaller in daylight, scarred and exhausted. Shattered glass had been boarded over scorch marks, stained the concrete near the entrance, and police vehicles crowded the parking lot. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the smell of smoke and cold metal. Jack Miller stood near his pickup truck, hands wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee someone had pressed into his palm without asking. He wore the same dark brown leather jacket, the same red and navy flannel, the same gray scarf pulled tight against the wind. His face was bruised a cut above his eyebrow, already crusting over his beard, flecked with dried blood. He felt every year of his 45, every old injury stirred awake by the night's work. Max sat beside him, calm and solid, his black and tan coat dusted with snow, his amber eyes alert, but no longer hunting. For the first time in years, Jack felt the quiet without flinching. Inside the hospital, Commander Ryan Cole lay propped up in his bed, pale but alive. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, but his eyes were clear, focused. Survival had not softened him. It had sharpened him. When the door opened and Lieutenant Mark Hayes stepped in, Cole nodded once. "Did we lose anyone?" Cole asked. "No," Hayes said. His voice cracked just slightly before he steadied it. "Because of him." Cole closed his eyes, briefly exhaling. He remembered flashes, now snow smoke, the controlled violence of movement. He remembered the man who never introduced himself, who didn't wait for permission. And he remembered the dog, silent and watchful, a shadow that moved with purpose. Cole swung his legs over the side of the bed, despite protests from the nurse. "Get me a coat." In the administrative wing, Dr. Ethan Brooks sat alone in a small office, his white coat folded neatly across his lap, like a prop that no longer fit. The confidence that had once defined him had collapsed under scrutiny. Security footage had been reviewed, statements recorded. The narrative he had crafted dissolved under facts he could not outrun. Brooks stared at his reflection in the darkened screen, seeing not a hero, but a man who had frozen when freezing was fatal. No one came to defend him. When Cole entered the lobby an hour later, supported by Hayes, conversation stopped. People turned. Nurses, orderlies, security officers, people who had hidden, who had followed, who had survived. Cole scanned the room until he found Jack near the door. Jack didn't move. He didn't straighten or step forward. He had learned long ago that respect demanded nothing. Cole stopped in front of him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Cole raised his right hand slowly, deliberately, despite the pain pulling at his face. He snapped a clean, unmistakable salute. The room went silent. Hayes followed suit. Then Chief Petty Officer Dan Wolfe Carter, his scarred face, solemn boots clicking as he came to attention. One by one, the men who understood what had happened did the same. Jack swallowed hard. Something tight and old twisted in his chest. He hadn't worn a uniform in years. He hadn't answered to rank since the night he'd walked away with scars no one saw. Slowly he returned the salute. It wasn't perfect. His arm shook just slightly. It was enough. "Thank you," Cole said quietly. "You saved my life." Jack nodded. "That's what I do." Later there were offers. Too many of them. Media requests that Jack ignored. Administrators who spoke of compensation and reinstatement as if paperwork could balance blood. Even Margaret Klein approached him, her severe posture softened by something close to regret. "We'd like you back," she said carefully, "with a new title, better pay." Jack looked past her toward the mountains barely visible beyond the hospital. "No," he said. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. That afternoon, Hayes found him again by the truck. Hayes had cleaned up, but fatigue still lined his face. He held out a simple folder unmarked. "There's a unit," Hayes said. "Support and recovery. No politics, no press. We take care of our own. We could use someone like you. Someone who doesn't panic when things fall apart." Jack glanced at Max, who looked back as if the answer were obvious. Jack exhaled slowly. "I'll think about it." Hayes smiled faintly. "That's all I ask." By evening, the hospital began to settle. Repairs started. Reports were filed. Stories grew already changing shape, as stories always did. But some truths remained untouched. In the staff locker room, Jack's old locker stood empty, its metal door dented from years of careless use. Someone no one ever admitted who had taped a printed image to the front. It was a still frame from a security camera, grainy and imperfect. It showed Jack standing amid smoke and chaos, one hand braced against a gurney, Max seated beside him, body tense, eyes forward. Beneath the image written in thick black marker was a single word: respect. Nurses paused when they passed it. Orderlies nodded. Even Dr. Brooks avoided looking at it, his gaze sliding away as if burned. Jack never went inside to see it. He drove away as the sun dipped low, Max's head resting against the passenger window, eyes half closed. The road stretched open ahead of them, uncertain and quiet. Jack didn't know what came next. He only knew this: he was no longer invisible. And neither was the dog at his side. This story is not just about courage under fire. It is about the quiet miracles that God places among us every day. Jack Miller did not wear a uniform or seek praise, yet, when lives hung in the balance, God used his steady hands and faithful heart to bring light into chaos. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder from heaven, but a man who shows up when others freeze, or a loyal companion who stands guard without fear. In our own lives, we often overlook the people God sends to help us, the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones the world dismisses. This story reminds us to look closer, to judge less, and to trust that God is always working even when we cannot see it. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what it meant to you, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of faith, courage, and redemption. May God bless you and protect you always.